Dr. Phil here, and I wanted to talk to you about the latest on the kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Savannah Guthrie, who I'm sure you all know from the Today Show. I do want to tell you what we know at this time, although it is changing sometimes hour to hour. The reason I'm talking about this is twofold. One is you're concerned about it just as I am. You probably feel like you know Savannah Guthrie because you've watched her so much. I do know Savannah Guthrie. I've worked with her a number of times. She's interviewed me over the years. I've spent some time talking to her off camera as we were getting ready for interviews, or we were sitting while others were doing things on the show, and we've had the opportunity to get to know one another. Let me tell you, there aren't two Savannah Guthries. She's not one way on camera and another way off camera. She's a very real, warm, genuine, authentic individual. So if you feel like you know her, you do get the real Savannah Guthrie on camera that you would get if you met her on the street or at some event or something. This obviously is a terrible, terrible time for her and her family, as I'm sure you're empathetically feeling for her. The other reason I'm talking about this is because I did choose to get trained in forensic psychology, which is psychology in the law, and that includes criminal activities. And for over 45 years now, I guess, I've either been working with law enforcement, I've worked with the FBI, state, local law enforcement. I've been involved in some of these kind of cases, and I've been reporting on them a lot over the last 25 years. And this is a very unusual and disturbing case. This isn't following the pattern that kidnappings typically follow. And sadly, there are enough that there is a pattern. And data and patterns matter in these kind of situations because they help you to know how to resolve them. And there are some things that it might be of interest to you to know. Most kidnappings don't get reported, probably because the kidnappers say, don't call the police. We have your loved one, don't call the police, and most people don't want to do it. They don't want to do anything to upset the apple cart. A decision has to be made really early on. You have to make a decision what your primary objective is. Is it, number one, to catch the perpetrators, or is it alternatively to get your loved one back? And almost always, it is to get your loved one back. And those aren't necessarily the same thing all the time. If it's to catch the perpetrators, you go down a different path in trying to catch them, trap them, discover who they are, versus just getting your loved one back, which you can do without finding out who it was that kidnapped them. And that's the reason they sometimes don't call the police, or if they do call the authorities, they're very discreet about it, and oftentimes the authorities will tell them, look, you have to decide, are you willing to pay a ransom or are you not? And if professionals are involved, these things get resolved about 97% of the time. If you have insurance against kidnapping, which most people don't, of course, or you have the money to pay, then the vast majority of the time, these things get resolved and the person gets recovered unharmed. Certainly if there are professional negotiators involved, because there is an art to this, there is a science to this. And let me assure you, there is nobody better at this than the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
There are streets in America that look the same every morning. Catalina Foothills sits just outside Tucson, Arizona, the kind of neighborhood where the desert heat presses down on terracotta rooftops, and the mornings are still and pale and unremarkable. The kind of place where nothing happens. The kind of place people choose precisely because nothing happens. February 1, 2026 started like any other day on that street. It didn't end that way. Sometime that day, someone made a call. Authorities arrived at a residence in the foothills, the home of an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie. She was not there. What they found instead was a house that had been disturbed in ways that required no explanation. the kind of disturbance that speaks for itself. And there on the front porch, blood, not a trace, enough to confirm, enough to change everything. It would later be confirmed as hers. Nancy Guthrie is not a public figure. She never asked to be known. But her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today show, one of the most recognized faces in American morning television. For decades, Savannah Guthrie has sat behind that desk and delivered the world's worst moments to millions of people over their coffee. She has reported disappearances. She has reported tragedies. She has looked into a camera and described the unimaginable with composure and grace. On February 1, 2026, the unimaginable came to her door. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nano stood before cameras and said what the evidence was already suggesting. He believed Nancy Guthrie had been abducted, not wandered, not fallen, taken, against her will, from her own home on a quiet street in a neighborhood where nothing happens. There was no clean explanation for how someone had entered. There was no sign that Nancy had left voluntarily. There was only the blood on the porch, the absence of a woman, and the particular silence that fills a house when someone has been removed from it by force. Investigators moved carefully. The FBI was brought in. The neighborhood, so accustomed to its own stillness, became something else entirely, a crime scene framed by desert sun and yellow tape. But here is what made this case different from the first hour. It wasn't just the violence implied by that blood. It wasn't just the age of the woman missing, or her health conditions, or the medication she would need. It was the feeling, quiet but insistent, that whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. That this was not impulsive. That someone had chosen Nancy Guthrie deliberately, and that the choosing had been intentional. That feeling would only deepen in the days ahead. But on February 1, all anyone knew was this. An 84-year-old woman was gone, her blood was on her own front porch, and somewhere in Tucson, or beyond it, someone knew where she was. Nobody was talking yet. If this case has already unsettled you, you're not alone. Like this video, subscribe to The Hidden Verdict and drop a comment below. Do you think Nancy Guthrie is still alive? We're reading every single one. In the days after Nancy Guthrie vanished, the silence held. Law enforcement worked quietly. Tips came in slowly. The public didn't yet know the full weight of what had happened on that porch in Catalina foothills. And then, the letters arrived. Not to the family first, not exclusively to police, to media outlets. Letters that announced themselves not as private communications between a criminal and a victim's family, but as something closer to a broadcast, as though whoever wrote them wanted an audience. There were multiple letters, eventually 4, and what they demanded was specific, enormous, and deliberate $6 million, in Bitcoin, untraceable, the kind of currency that exists precisely because it leaves no paper trail, no fingerprints, no return address. A deadline was set, February 9, 2026. Read that again. A deadline. As though this were a transaction. As though an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and high blood pressure were a line item on a ledger, to be settled by a date circled on a calendar. The letters reportedly threatened her life if payment was not made in time. They were crafted to generate maximum pressure on the family, on investigators, on the public watching from the outside. But investigators and analysts began asking a question that would define much of what followed. Who sends ransom letters to the press? Ransom communications, historically, are private by design. They are leverage power held in secret between the abductor and the family. Sending them to media outlets transforms them into something else entirely. It turns a kidnapping into a performance. It signals an awareness of public attention, of news cycles, of the way a story like this, involving Savannah Guthrie's mother, would move through the media ecosystem like wildfire. Whoever wrote these letters understood optics. That understanding is either the mark of a calculating criminal or the beginning of a different kind of deception altogether. Then came the surveillance footage. FBI Director Kash Patel released black and white images, grainy, stripped of color, stripped of comfort, showing a masked figure outside Nancy Guthrie's home, armed, wearing gloves, a backpack on their back, moving with a stillness that looked almost rehearsed. No panic in their posture, no hesitation. The images circulated immediately. Tips flooded in. The case, already heavy with urgency, became national in a way that even the initial disappearance had not fully achieved. Faces across the country studied that blurred, masked figure and asked the same question: who is that? February 9 came. The deadline passed. No confirmation of payment, no proof of life, no Nancy. The silence after a deadline is a particular kind of silence. It doesn't bring relief. It brings a new layer of uncertainty, because now the rules that were set, whatever they were worth, no longer apply. The script has gone off-page. And off-page is exactly where this story was headed. 4 letters, 1 deadline, no proof of life. Share this video with someone who's been following this case and subscribe to The Hidden Verdict for every update as it develops.
Have this to an absolute science. Their primary investigator, that's now retired, is a gentleman named Chris Voss, and he is the master at how to go about this. If you don't have professionals involved in negotiation, the resolution drops to about 40%. If no ransom is paid, it drops to about 11%. If you're willing to pay the ransom and you've got professionals involved in the negotiations, these things usually turn out okay. And by the way, it's not like you see on television. It's not like, $50 million are paid. The average kidnapping is not a high-yield crime. It's single-digit thousands globally. So this isn't something that kidnappers get rich over. It's very rare that there's a big high-dollar kidnapping that they pay and the person gets returned and the kidnappers get rich. One of the things that we know is that when kidnappers abduct somebody, they want a quick resolution. They want it over with as fast as they possibly can. Now, why is that true? Well, of course, they want to get paid quickly. That's the number one thing. But number two, it's very risky to keep an individual that you've abducted for any period of time. I mean, think about everything that can go wrong. First, you have to have a place to keep them. And the longer you have them, the higher the risk of them being discovered, the higher the risk of them escaping, the higher the risk that something can go wrong. If you've got them in a warehouse somewhere, somebody can notice something going wrong. If the kidnapper is in a community somewhere, they live somewhere, and they have to be gone to monitor their abduction.
There is a particular kind of helplessness that comes with waiting. Not the helplessness of doing nothing, but the helplessness of doing everything available to you and still watching the hours pile up without answer. That is what the weeks after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance looked like from the outside. And from the inside, it must have felt immeasurable. February became late February. The investigation continued. The FBI remained involved. Tips were processed. The surveillance image that masked still figure had been seen by millions of people, and yet Nancy remained missing. Her whereabouts unconfirmed. Her condition unknown. On February 24, the Guthrie family made a public announcement. $1 million offered as a reward for any information that could lead directly to Nancy's safe recovery. Not information about the case in general, not tips that added to the pile, information that brought her home. The announcement was measured and deliberate, but underneath its careful language was something raw, the acknowledgement that official processes, federal resources, and weeks of investigation had not been enough, that the family was now reaching past the infrastructure of law enforcement and directly into the public, offering something tangible in exchange for the one thing they did not have: information. And then there was Savannah. Savannah Guthrie stepped away from the Today Show, the woman whose professional identity is built on showing up, on being present, composed, and reliable behind that desk every single morning, was no longer there. She stepped away to be with her family, to be part of the search, to stop reporting and start living inside the story. That detail, small as it might seem in the timeline of a kidnapping investigation, carries enormous weight, because Savannah Guthrie does not step away. She has reported through personal difficulty before. The fact that this pulled her from that desk entirely tells you something about the gravity of what her family was living through. Nancy's health had become an increasingly urgent part of the narrative by this point. She is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She manages high blood pressure. She has mobility limitations. She requires daily medication she had now gone without for weeks. In a kidnapping, time is never neutral. Every day is not just another day. It is compounding risk for a woman whose body requires consistent medical attention. The ransom letters had set a deadline as though urgency were their tool. But the real urgency was quieter, and it belonged to Nancy. March 25. Investigators confirmed what the silence had already been saying: her whereabouts remained unknown. No confirmed sighting, no confirmed condition, no arrest, no resolution. $1 million reward, an FBI investigation, national media coverage. And still, an empty chair where an 84-year-old woman used to sit. The case was not going cold, but it was going somewhere stranger. Something was coming that would fracture public opinion and weaponize the one thing this family could least afford to lose. Hope. A mother, a pacemaker, weeks without medication. Comment below, what do you think happened that night on that porch? And if this story matters to you, subscribe to The Hidden Verdict. We don't look away. Then came the tip that split everything in two. A source contacted TMZ, not law enforcement, not the family's legal team, not a federal tip line. TMZ. The claim was simple and staggering in equal measure. Nancy Guthrie was alive. She was in Mexico. In a case defined by silence and uncertainty, that claim landed like a flare in the dark. It moved instantly. Shared, debated, dissected across social media platforms and comment sections and group chats within hours. Because that is what hope does in a vacuum, it accelerates. People who had been following this case for weeks, who had sat with the weight of not knowing, grabbed onto the Mexico claim with both hands. She is alive, she is across the border, she can still come home. But investigators pushed back, hard and fast. Family representatives pushed back. Legal analysts who had been watching the case closely pushed back. The characterization that emerged from those closest to the investigation was unambiguous. This was a scam. A deliberate, calculated exploitation of a family in crisis, designed to extract something, money, attention, credibility, from the wreckage of their grief. The word used repeatedly was brutal, not just dishonest, brutal. Because that is the specific cruelty of a false tip in a missing persons case. It does not simply waste investigative resources, though it does that too. It reaches into the chest of a family that has been surviving on fumes for weeks and offers them a breath, and then takes it away. It makes hope into a weapon. It turns the most human of instincts, the refusal to stop believing, into a vulnerability to be exploited. Someone understood that vulnerability. Someone chose to use it. And then there was the letter itself, the fourth one. The one that prompted questions no one could fully answer yet. Was it written by the same hand as the first three? The tone, the timing, the specificity of the Mexico claim all raised the possibility that this was not simply a continuation of the original Ransom communication. It felt different. It felt authored by someone who had been watching the case from the outside. Someone who understood its rhythms well enough to insert themselves into it convincingly. Or perhaps it was the same author, testing the waters, shifting the geography of the story to create confusion, to redirect investigators, to buy time. Either possibility is deeply unsettling, because the first means there is now a second predator circling this case. And the second means the original abductor is sophisticated enough to manage a public narrative while holding an 84-year-old woman somewhere no one has found her yet. This is the architecture of manipulation in its most cynical form, not just a crime committed in the dark, a crime being conducted, at least in part, in full public view, using media attention as both shield and instrument. The TMZ tip was called a scam, but the damage of a scam like this cannot be undone with a correction. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again. Someone used this family's worst nightmare as an opportunity. Share this video because this story deserves more than clicks. It deserves attention. Subscribe to The Hidden Verdict and tell us in the comments, do you believe the Mexico tip or does something feel deeply wrong to you? Come back to the beginning. Come back to the street in Catalina foothills, the pale morning, the terracotta rooftops, the particular stillness of a neighborhood that had not yet become a crime scene. Come back to the porch, to the blood, to the absence of a woman who was supposed to be inside. That image has not changed. Everything that followed, the letters, the deadline, the surveillance footage, the reward, the TMZ tip, the Mexico claim, the accusations of a brutal scam, all of it orbits that single, original fact. Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home, and she has not been brought back. Let's hold what we know, and hold it plainly. An 84-year-old woman disappeared from her home in Tucson on February 1, 2026. Blood was found on her porch. The county sheriff stated publicly that he believes she had been abducted. 4 ransom letters were sent, at least in part, to media outlets, demanding $6 million in Bitcoin by February 9. A masked figure was caught on surveillance cameras outside her home. The FBI became involved. The family offered a $1 million reward. A tipster told TMZ she was alive in Mexico. Investigators and family representatives called that claim a scam, and as of the recording of this video, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. That is the shape of what we know. What we don't know is larger. We don't know who that masked figure is. We don't know whether the ransom letters represent a genuine kidnapping or an elaborate construction designed to look like one. We don't know whether the Mexico tip was a separate exploitation layered on top of an existing crime, or whether it originated from the same source as the original letters. We don't know whether Nancy Guthrie is alive. We don't know if she is afraid. That last part is the part that should stay with you. Not the Bitcoin demands, not the surveillance image, not the TMZ headline or the fractured public debate about whether to believe it. The part that should stay with you is a woman, a mother, a grandmother, a person with a pacemaker and a daily medication schedule and a life built quietly in the Arizona desert, who was removed from everything familiar to her and has not been returned. True crime as a genre can sometimes make the mistake of treating unresolved cases as incomplete entertainment. This one has no twist ending to offer, no arrest to reveal, no satisfying close. What it has is an open question that belongs not just to investigators or to the Guthrie family, but to anyone paying attention. Because the more people who know this story, the more eyes exist to recognize something. A face, a detail, a piece of information sitting unexamined somewhere. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. That sentence should feel like what it is, unfinished. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. If you know anything at all, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Office or the FBI tip line. And if this story stayed with you, like this video, subscribe to The Hidden Verdict, share it with your community and leave a comment below. The more eyes on this case, the better. We'll keep watching.